I'm going to start today's lectures by finishing up with the mechanical senses, and I'm going to apologize a little bit to both classes because for section 1 I'm going to go through these first few slides really quickly, and I skipped a couple, and for section 3 these first few slides are a repeat, but I'm just going to go through them quite quickly. So we had just really finished going over these opioid mechanisms, our own opiate type chemicals in our brains, endorphins, and how they are having an inhibitory effect on those pain afferents. So that's a good thing to make sure we come back to and give ourselves the context of talking about placebos. So when we're using placebos for pain, this is not just about relaxation. In fact, we see changes to brain activity. We see a decreased response to pain, lower cingulate cortex activity. This does not influence the somatosensory cortex, so our actual feeling, the finger, as I keep using my finger burning or something, that I am burning my finger, that is feeling is happening in the somatosensory cortex where I'm conscious of my body, but that part of my brain that is telling me this is bothersome, this is horrible, and so forth, that is not happening in the same way. And for the other class, I did show how this is not just relaxation, that they've even done a study where they've injected capsaicin into hands and feet. And so they had pain in all of those extremities. And for some people, they gave them a placebo cream before injecting the capsaicin on their left hand, and that lowered the pain for their left hand, but not for those other extremities. And they've even crossed the body to make sure that this isn't sort of a hemispheric thing in the brain. So they've used the cream on the right hand and the left foot, and those two extremities felt less pain than the other two. So this isn't just about relaxation, and it looks like it is specific to the area of pain potentially. There is research being conducted on other mechanisms for relieving pain because of not just the opioid crisis, but the fact that if you take enough opiates, that it increases activity of the immune system, and we can see people get an increase in sensitivity to pain over time. So they've done some research on cannabinoids, so the chemical that is in marijuana, but really not much research has been done on this. What they do know is that it is affecting the receptors in the peripheral nervous system, not the central nervous system. So they took mice and they deleted those receptors in the peripheral nervous system, and then the cannabinoids had no effect on their pain. And then cannabinoids, however, give some memory problems, so it's not necessarily an answer to any kind of opioid crisis. It's a different kind of drug and issue. Capsaicin helps for certain kinds of pain. So the simplest way, and I'm just going to talk about this, how the textbook that I have that discusses it in the simplest way, that it's releasing that substance P faster than neurons can resynthesize it. So they're, for a short time, for a while, they are unable to send messages about pain. And so this is something you might use if you have a chronically kind of sore shoulder, or you've torn your shoulder so that it's going to hurt for a few weeks. You might rub some capsaicin on it. People with arthritis might try capsaicin, where there's a temporary burning, but then it's followed by a longer period of decreased pain. And so people in section 1 might just want to pause this and read it. I think everything's on there. But then I go into this, some of these studies that have shown the effects of cognition on pain. And if people know what to expect, they have less pain. If we shift their attention, they can have less pain. Okay, and this is where we were in section 3. So we also have the content of the emotional distraction from pain is important. So Dweed and Verbatim did a study where participants were looking at positive pictures, neutral pictures, or negative pictures. And the participants had their hands immersed in cold water that was to the point of being somewhat painful. And they were told to keep their hand immersed for as long as possible, but then to withdraw it when their hand began to hurt. And just so I tell a little bit about this, I think this study is kind of funny, that it was done solely on men, and they had a different group of men rating these pictures. Positive pictures were mostly of females and fancy sports cars. Neutral pictures included nature. I can't remember the other neutral pictures, but that in itself, I thought, isn't nature kind of positive? But it included nature and some other neutral things. The negative pictures were really negative. They were like someone being burned or in a car wreck, or just these really, kind of almost disturbing pictures. And you can see that the people who were looking at positive pictures were able to keep their hand in the water for longer before feeling like it hurt, and they just needed to bring it out as soon as it began to hurt. And then that was longer than the neutral or the negative, which, if I remember correctly, were not statistically different from each other. I did have one student in one of my brain and behavior classes suggest that maybe those positive pictures were actually causing some autonomic nervous system response because of the kind of positive pictures that they were. So there's a little bit of a confound there, but I think it still works as just showing that pain is not the same in all situations. In 1965, Ronald Melzack and Patrick Wall proposed the gate control model of pain. And it explains these kinds of findings. Even though these are much later findings, we had some research already, and we knew already that the previous model of pain, which basically was, we have these nociceptors, they tell the brain about pain, and that was it. So we knew it was more complicated than that. One of the studies that came out that made it clear that we had to propose something that showed that pain was more complicated was a study that was conducted in 1946 by Dr. Henry Beecher. He was working with the soldiers at Anzio Beachhead that were hospitalized and taken off the battlefield. So if I remember Anzio Beachhead correctly, which I did not go look it up, but I think it was 6 weeks of just being bombed. And so it was miserable. It was frightening. It was an awful situation where you were basically watching the people die and hoping that you didn't die in the same kind of, and hearing the sounds that the bombs make, which when they tell you if you're hearing it, then you're going to live because you'd already be hit by a bomb that you were hearing. So he was working with these soldiers in the hospitals, and for them, or the hospital, and for them to get out of the battle and be put in the hospital, they had to have pretty extensive damage. And again, I can't remember exactly how much damage, but it had to be like abdominal damage, losing a hand, something that was pretty extensive that they could no longer be helpful out in the battlefield. And here they were in the hospital. He was offering them, I think he said to them that they could have some kind of pain analgesic. He never used the word morphine because people were reticent to use morphine. And the soldiers were basically saying, I don't really have any pain, and I don't need any kind of analgesic for it. And they weren't just saying they didn't want an analgesic. They did not seem to have any pain. And he hypothesized at the time that this was basically just they were so relieved to be out of that situation that they weren't really feeling the same kind of pain that we would if we had that kind of abdominal damage in a different situation. I somewhat think that could be a little bit some of that survivor's guilt, that they know that their friends are still out there living through that. They don't know who's going to live and who's going to die and all that. But either way, it doesn't really matter exactly why they weren't feeling pain. They weren't feeling pain when most of us would be in excruciating pain. And so in 1965, Melzack and Wall proposed this gate control model where I'm going to call central control is in the brain. Everything else here is in the spinal cord at wherever that pain, the spinal nerves that are innervating that area, wherever that pain is being felt. Okay, and I'm going to walk you through this model. So nociceptors, I'm going to start with the bottom with the nociceptors, which are small fibers. right? They are sending excitatory information. They are synapsing in the substantia gelatinosa, that area just inside the dorsal root. And that can open the gate to pain. We can see those are excitatory. They can also directly connect or synapse with the transmission cell, as the T cell is, and have an excitatory effect. Nociceptors are telling us we are in pain. But you can see that there's also substantia gelatinosa that have an inhibitory effect, closing the gate to pain, as they called it. So my large fibers would be the fibers coming in from my mechanoreceptors. They might have an excitatory effect on the transmission cell. So if I actually have a burn on my arm and someone touches that, my mechanoreceptors might also have an excitatory effect. But if you've ever noticed, so one of the things our moms do, not knowing all of this background, but that we've just learned to do, and we do ourselves. So if you bump your elbow or slam your finger or something, a lot of times what you'll do, so I'm going to do my elbow, you'll rub around it, right? And your mom will like rub your arm if you've gotten hurt on the arm, or rub your leg if you've gotten hurt on the leg. And so what that is doing is it's sending excitatory signals to those inhibitory substantia gelatinosa, the SG-, and that is closing the gate to pain, so making it less likely that we're going to feel pain. And of course, we can be getting both of these signals, but we know that those mechanoreceptors can have an inhibitory influence on the information coming from the nociceptors. You'll also see that we have central control, which is the brain, sending down descending messages to the inhibitory substantia gelatinosa and closing the gate to pain. All right, I'm going to go on to my next slide where I continue to show this model and with some ascending and descending fibers. Okay, so these pictures are kind of a lot, and you might want to just pause this and look at the pictures so that you think about the words and everything before moving on, or after, or during, or whatever. I'm going to start with the middle picture. We've just talked about the gate control model, which is on your left. The middle picture is, and these are images from Laura Freeberg's Behavioral Neuroscience book. It's a really good textbook in a lot of ways, but it's very complicated and she gets a few things wrong, and I got a little annoyed when I was teaching from it, even though in some ways I've taken her information and used it, and certainly her images are so informative that I've taken a lot of those. But so that middle picture is showing the ascending pathway for pain. It's not really showing the effect of the mechanoreceptors, but those nociceptors feeling the pain and sending that information up to up the spinothalamic pathway to the thalamus, and then those different thalamic nuclei communicating to different areas of the brain. What's also important, or what's going to be important for my points that I'm about to make, is the picture on the right, the descending pathways. So this is central control, or what I sometimes accidentally call cognitive control, but coming from the forebrain, our frontal cortex. So what are we paying attention to? Sometimes we can consciously distract ourselves. The thalamus, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, these are all areas that are involved in potentially responding to pain. Information going through the paraaqueductal gray is important for one reason, that we can release endorphins. So if you've ever had a runner's high, that is you're in a pretty happy experience and not really feeling the pain that you might have gotten from running, whether it's something of not just your muscles, but maybe you've hurt your foot or something and you might not really feel it at all. Going through the raphe nuclei and then through the dorsal horn. So in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord, and we're back at those substantia gelatinosa, or the SG- in this case, of the dorsal area of the spinal cord. Okay, I'm going to move us back over to the gate control model to explain why I think we probably want to think through that excitatory input to the inhibitory substantia gelatinosa as being the only way that central control can influence pain. And I think it's important to think through our models and what they are giving us. And while there has not been a better model proposed that is really explaining aspects of pain, many different research studies are saying, here's this complication and this complication that I'm going to talk about right now very briefly, hopefully. So we have that as being inhibitory, and when we think about endorphins or distraction or something positive, shifting our attention, which is basically distraction. What was the other one? Knowing what to expect. All of that is really that central control having an inhibitory effect and closing the gate to pain. But there are times when our central control can have an excitatory effect. So if I'm in some kind of acute stress, I might feel more pain. People who are more constantly stressed and anxious feel more pain. If we pay attention to that pain and we think about how much this should be hurting, then we feel more pain. So there is a reason to think that sometimes that central control can have an excitatory effect. How exactly that works is not clear from the models. So I've put quite a lot on the slide here, but this last section was about the sensitization of pain. That we can also see that we do know how this works to a great extent. And some of it is at the point of pain, and some of it is at the point of neurons, neural response. So I'm going to start with the sunburn or damaged skin, inflamed skin, where we have some kind of sore or where we're going to be having some pain. When we have that, the skin is releasing histamines, nerve growth factor, and other chemicals that are helping to repair the skin is the point of all of those. But those magnify our responses to heat and pain. So if we have sunburn, I know, as you know, if you get something hot, or even if you touch the sunburn, you're going to feel pain, inflamed skin, again, because of this release of these chemicals. But another aspect of pain sensitization is how we learn to be in pain. So what happens in learning, and we're going to talk about this in learning and memory and get more specific about how this is happening, but there's a barrage of stimulation to a neuron. So the presynaptic neuron is communicating to the postsynaptic neuron, and this kind of continuous, quick communication, which we're going to potentiate synapses. So we're going to create more receptors on the dendrites, or more dendritic spines. We're going to release more neurotransmitter from the presynaptic neuron. So those synapses are going to be stronger synapses. They're going to respond more vigorously to the same input in the future. Basically, our body, our neurons, learn to be in pain just like we learn anything else. We know that painful stimuli decreases GABA, as I mentioned earlier on Monday. And we know that our body learns how to feel pain and it gets better at it. So this really explains not just the kind of chronic pain, but the fact that if we have some pain that we are having for some amount of time, that area is more likely to feel pain in the future with any little mishap. And I can almost point to my own lower back and say, yep, there's pain there. That the neurons were stimulated, and it's very easy for me to feel pain down there. And so if you've talked to anybody in pain, that you know that this is that this works, unfortunately, for us. So one of the things he talks about very briefly here is that if we are going to take opiates for our pain, that it's better really to start those opiates before surgery, and certainly or immediately after, but certainly not to wait. So a lot of people, we don't want to take opiates because of the fear of becoming addicted, because they are so addictive. But the truth is, if we took them early, and especially if we took them before the surgery, so that as soon as that sort of post-operative pain was occurring, because remember, they don't really have an effect on the sharper pain that would be happening during surgery. But if we're under anesthetic when that's happening, it's going to be okay. And then as soon as we come out of surgery, we already have some of the desensitization from the drugs, so that we're not feeling that pain. We need to take those opiates for less time. We're less likely to get addicted, which is a little bit, it feels counterintuitive, but again, that it works because of the way the body does learn to be in pain, or how neurons learn to be in pain. Okay, this was the mechanical senses. Again, I hope you guys ask questions if you have them, especially. I think pain is fascinating. I have taught this for a number of years, and I learned something new every time I teach it and every time I read anything. It's kind of a fascinating topic.